Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to virtual Queensborough Hall and this June meeting of the Borough Board. We have one agenda item today, but I just want to remind folks when we get to the Q&A portion, if you got questions, please use the reactions function on the Zoom app, so you can raise a hand. I think that might be a clapping, but one of those functions, it'll signal to me that you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, and we'll certainly tee that up. I see that we are joined by most of the members of the Borough Board, but of course also I see Councilmember Danny Drum and also Chair of the City Council Finance Committee. I don't even know how you're here right now because I know there are round the clock negotiations between the council and the mayor on the fiscal 21 budget. And I see we have a representative from council members Adrian Adams's office and council member Jimmy Van Bramer's office. And if there is anybody else here representing an agency or an elected official, specifically a council member, I ask you to do one of these reactions on Zoom just to flag yourself. Couple of quick announcements. We've got a couple of events coming up at Borough Hall, but before that, in the last several weeks, I had the pleasure and the honor and the privilege to issue appointments for the 2020 to 2022 two-year term or 22-month term of the community boards. Was delighted and very proud of all 339 appointments. And I'm proud to report to you that we had a robust pool of applicants, 595 applications, and every single applicant is a public servant in their own right. You would be proud if you saw all 595 applications. I think that's an indicator of the strength of our borough, of so many civic-minded people and public servants. And so delighted that all appointments are in. I will remind folks, and if you will kindly relay to your respective colleagues on the community boards, that no individual is entitled or guaranteed a seat on a community board. To serve as a privilege that we all cherish and we do to our utmost. And each two-year term to a community board is a brand new application. So the next round of applications for the 2021 to 2023 term will begin after the close of this calendar year. But again, we should be very proud of all the applications. And on that note, I want to welcome a new member to the Borough Board of Community Board 2. We have Acting Chair Lisa Deller. Welcome to the Queensborough Board. And with that, a couple event announcements. We've got a Pride Month celebration, a virtual one. It's an annual event that we had to go virtual. That will be held this Thursday. I'm delighted to co-sponsor that in tradition with Councilmember Drum and Councilmember Van Bramer. That'll be this Thursday online at 2 p.m. And we hope it will be a wonderful program, especially in light of a victory delivered by the Supreme Court earlier today. We also have a job fair. Yes, wasn't that wonderful? We also have a job fair. We've been holding a job fair every 3 months since the pandemic began, particularly for Queens. And the next one is a week from this Wednesday, so June 24. At 2:00 p.m. and that'll be live here on queensbp.org. But speaking of job fairs, the last one was on June 3rd, and one of our featured employers or recruiters was none other than, of course, our featured speaker for today. The agenda item, we've got an overview of the New York City Test and Trace Corps, which is a program, as many of you know, run by NYC H&H in collaboration with the Health Department, Do It, TLC, et cetera. But contact tracing and testing is, I mean, we are very much still in a pandemic, and there is still very much a global and deadly virus in our midst. And as we are in phase one in the city of New York, and as we move toward additional phases of reopening, and every day is a race against time, the way that we manage the bending of this curve will be critical in our ability to get on this road to recovery and rebuild in a safe way. And testing and contact tracing are critical cornerstones of our ability to launch this road to recovery and rebuild. And so today, we are delighted to welcome um, someone who I've known for a very long time, in many lifetimes ago, over a decade ago. Vicki and I used to talk to her at 250 Broadway in our city council days. Um, and right now, she is the Chief Equity Officer for the New York City Test and Trace Corps. She graced us with her presence and her insights at our job fair, the Queen's Job Fair, earlier this month, where we had over 340 interested folks logged in and tuning in for employment opportunities, including the contact tracing opportunities that are offered by the Test and Trace Corps. But the Honorable Annabelle Palma, former council member, welcome back to virtual Borough Hall. Ms. Palma will deliver an overview of the Test and Trace Corps, as well as the resources that it provides to all New Yorkers. And so without further ado, please begin.
Thank you so much, Borough President Lee. It's good to be with you and with the members of your team this evening. As Borough President Lee mentioned, I have been asked by the mayor to join the Test and Trace Corps team as their Chief Equity Officer. And my role is basically to promote general awareness for the Test and Trace program, to really connect with communities, to let them know how important it is that community people are coming forward on a voluntary basis to get tested, to share information on who they've come in contact with, so we're able to do tracing. And then through those efforts, if anyone is positive, test positive for the COVID-19, there a lot that we offered them to come in and do self-separation from their family, isolation from their family in a hotel, in hotel rooms that we have rented, to make sure that folks can safely separate from their families until they're able to go back home. If they're not able to do so at home, a lot of people, we have tested hundreds of people already. Some individuals have volunteered to come in and take advantage of staying in the hotel to safely separate from their families, and they're receiving services at the hotel that they're in. And so my job is really to connect to individuals like yourself who are on the ground, who are community leaders, who have the pulse of the community and know what's going on the ground, know the fears of the communities and why people won't come forward to get tested, to let them, to build that relationship with you, to help build that infrastructure in your community and let folks know and educate them on the importance of getting tested. We are not going to be able to do this alone. You heard what Borough President Lee mentioned. This is still a very live and active virus. This is still being spread among communities, but especially communities of color and underserved communities. And so what we want to make sure is that those communities who have been hit the hardest, and we know that many of them are in Queens and in the Bronx and in other parts of our city, get the resources that they deserve to be able to safely get back to a healthy New York. We know that, we talk about a new normal, right? We talk about individuals being able to get back to some sort of normalcy, but with that, what that means is the continuation of protecting ourselves and protecting others and protecting our communities. And so our role, our goal with this program is to make a strong commitment to the community, to ensure that folks, right, don't feel that this is government just trying to be watchful of any particular individual, especially of any ethnic group. This is not a program where we're going to be asking for immigration status. So, we need to make sure that our messaging is strong and that leaders like yourself help dispel any any myths that are out there that people shouldn't come forward or seek services because their immigration status will be revealed. This is not what this is about. This is simply about testing and tracing, and then take care at home program, whether you are able to self-isolate at home or again, take advantage of the opportunity that we have secured to safely ask you to quarantine or safely separate from your family in one of the hotel rooms that we have. This program has had to be ramped up fairly quickly. We did not expect that this virus would do what it did to New York City, let alone the world. And so, we've had some hiccups along the way, but we learn every day through our partnerships with the community, with local elected leaders, with faith-based leaders on what we should be doing to make sure that the communities are, again, getting the resources that they deserve, making sure that folks are educated and know that the Test and Trace program really has the best interest of New Yorkers in mind, and that we can get back to a healthy New York and a safe New York.
Right, thank you. Whenever I'm about to say your name, I keep saying Councilmember Palma because it's part of my muscle memory. Thank you, Ms. Palma, for that presentation. And before I open it to the chairs, just a real quick on a related item. I know that at our last Borough Board meeting, there were some requests from the chairs for PPEs. I believe that since then, every request has been met, or at least partially met. We have urged City Hall to supply those immediately within days of that brought to our attention. And thank you so much for getting those PPEs out to the communities. But going back to the contact tracing, around the globe, we've seen contact tracing as one of several cornerstones of being able to come back online and to rebuild and to recover. And it hinges entirely on trust, especially contact tracing. And so we will rely heavily on our community boards to get that information, to dispel the myths about what contact tracing means, to encourage testing, to encourage protection. And again, before I open it up, I see Councilmember Drum, you're still here. Would you like to say a couple of words?
No, just thank you, Borough President, and what a historic day it's been for us. I faced a lot of discrimination myself in terms of my teaching position back in the 1990s, where they tried to remove me from my job. And so today is a great day, I think, for all Americans. And thank you. And it's great to see, I call her former council member, Annabelle Palmer as well, my good friend. And it's great to be here. Thank you. We're working on a budget. We're working on a budget.
30 hours a day, right? No rest for the weary. Thank you, Council Member. And with that, are there any questions or comments from board members? I don't see any hands right now. For folks who have turned off their video, I'm going to ask you to turn the video on simply because on the live feed, if you're not visually or visible, it will not show up on the record.
There's two hands up.
Okay.
Board 14 also has Board 14 has a question.
Okay.
Chair Orr.
I see Chair Orr, and then from 14, then also Chair Budabin after.
And me.
and are curious.
So I apologize, I don't have my video on, but it's a new laptop and I seem to be having problems with the video, so I apologize. So Community Board 14 had the second highest rates of death in Queens, and we only got a testing site on June 4th. So it did take the city 3 months to get us a testing site. The location, there was no consultation with the electeds, with the community board, with the local civic. We had construction from 6 o'clock in the morning to 1 o'clock in the morning. We have structural damage in a number of homes. And it's a concern. We understand, we believe they've only been open less than a week, that it's only about 30, they're only testing about 30 individuals a day. There's 40 trailers there. We don't know what the capacity is. We haven't been given that yet, the capacity. And we would like to know what is the outreach that's being done. And also you mentioned being able to relocate individuals into hotels. Have you identified a hotel in which you would put Rockaway residents, that they would not be too far from what is familiar to them? Because we did have 2 empty hotels until 2 days ago, when the city moved 200 homeless women into those 2 available hotels. So those are my two questions.
Thank you for your question, Ms. Hall. I will definitely check in with our team that is in charge of the setup of the site. That many sites were set up, as you know, through construction. We wanted to make sure that we were erecting sites that were going to meet the needs of the community. I was not aware of what engagement was done, I'm not aware, but I can find out what kind of engagement was done in identifying the site in Community Board 14. I will tell you that, yes, it was just recently open, but our program just kicked off on June 1st. Was when we went live with our program and opening of the sites and rolling out the plan that we have for test and trace. Besides some of the sites that are physical structures in a community, we also now have mobile units that we started to roll out this week. And I know that the first 2 mobile units that were rolled out were sent to sites in Queens and in the Bronx, again, identifying the highest, the hardest hit zip codes. And so I'm sorry.
So why did it take, I'm sorry, why did it take 3 months to get testing in an area that had the second highest death rate?
I will have to get back to you because I just came on at the end of June. So I will get you a response on why it took 3 months to get testing, particularly for Community Board 14. I know that testing was being done throughout the city once this whole nightmare started. And so I will get you a definitive answer into why it took 3 months to get testing specifically for Community Board 14. I'm sorry that I cannot answer that for you today. I was not part of the team, and the test and trace course just rolled out June 1st.
Okay, thank you. And I understand that. So what efforts are there on a community-based level in terms of getting tracers?
So there's different types of community outreach being done. We have our corps team has community engagement team that is identifying local organizations, identifying who we connect with in the community. And so I myself have been proactively trying to reach out to individuals, like Borough President Lee had mentioned. I was invited to speak at the job fair on June last week when the job fair was on. I was invited to speak today to this group, and so I'm proactively trying to connect to individuals who would allow me to bring the message of test and trace and make those connections and bring further education. I know that we have palm cards, we have our website up, we have been doing social media, we have been doing pay media to let folks know that the program rolled out, that we are live, that people should be coming to get tested. You also mentioned hotels. I will commit to send President Lee a list of the hotels that we are using so that folks know where they're located. But again, if you call 311 or you go to nyc.gov / COVID test, you will be able to see where the testing sites are, and you will be able to speak to someone who can part of our team that will let you know where the hotels are if you safely choose to isolate.
Okay,
you,
thank you
Council
very
Member.
much. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member, and thank you, Chair Orr, for elevating some of the dire needs and the challenges of District 14. Councilmember Homa, can you repeat that website? And Borough Hall team, could you type that into the chat room for folks?
Sure. Our website is nyc.gov / COVID test. Or you can call
Test is singular?
Yes, TEST.
Okay.
And you
COVID
can also
test.
call 311.
Okay. And did I hear correctly? So you'll send me a list of hotels
Yes,
that are being used for the isolation, but are you also welcoming suggestions or even connections with hotel operators who would like to be part of the isolation facilities for the testing and tracing?
Absolutely. And any suggestion, my goal is, right, to listen to what the community has to say, to try my best to make sure that the community needs are being met. And so I'm always asking for suggestions, for ideas, and to allow us to make those connections. Last week, we had an organization proactively reach out to me and from the Bronx and say, hey, this is what I can offer. How can we make it happen? And so I'm the individual that is making those connections happen. And so I will ask each and every one of you, if you have any suggestions, any ideas, you can reach out to me directly. You can reach out to me through the Borough President's office. I am always available to make sure that, where the needs are being met and that no community feels like they're not getting the resources that they need.
Thank you. Next, we have Chair Budabin of Board 11, followed by Chair Arcuri of Board 5.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Borough President. And thank you very much, Ms. Palmer, for your presentation. I'm just going to ask a few quick questions here for efficiency up front. If any of these were answered during your presentation, I apologize in advance. So I imagine that if you go to a city testing site and you were to test positive, that you would be referred to the test and trace program on the spot. But is the same thing happening if you test positive in a walk-in clinic or through your doctor's office? Are they being provided this information, and will you be referred, or would you have to do that sort of unilaterally on your own? And sort of in relation to that, is there any punitive enforcement mechanism for those that aren't interested in taking part in the program? And if you want to participate partially, for example, some folks may say, hey, I really believe in, tracing, and I know that's really important, but I live with one person who's comfortable with my diagnosis, and we feel that we can separate in our own home. Are you allowed to say participate in half the program, do the tracing, but still stay in your own home? I'm sensitive to the fact that some people may be frankly nervous about raising the fact that they're positive, being concerned that the city is going to force them to relocate. So I just wanted to make sure that I understood how that would work.
So thank you, Chair Budabin, for your questions. So this is not at all in any way, shape or form meant to be punitive to anyone who comes forward to test. You can absolutely choose to isolate at home if you are able to. We're not saying that you can do that, and you will still receive all the services that Test, Trace, and Take Care at Home provides. So if you need meals, if you need help, intervention with your jobs, legal services, whatever the case is that you need due to isolating, you will still receive those services if you choose not to come into one of our hotels. So it's not meant to be punitive at all. If you test, if you walk into one of our any of our pop-up sites, mobile units, you test positive, you definitely be connected to the program immediately. But it's that's also the case for the public hospitals, right? Because we're working in partnership with DOHMH and the Health and the Health and Hospitals Corporation. So this is a partnership, a New York City partnership, intra-agency with all public health providers that we need to do to get the information that we need and to get the services to the people that need them.
Okay, that's very helpful. I appreciate that. So if someone is going to a private medical facility, for example, it's possible that they wouldn't necessarily be referred, meaning there'd probably be some benefit for us to really pushing out the message about the availability of the program. Essentially, it's public and city-run facilities that would be sort of directly pushing this program or promoting the program upon someone testing positive. Not necessarily at private facilities. I assume that message is going out to them as well. Is that correct?
The message is definitely going out to private facilities as well. And we've actually partnered up with some private facilities where they're doing the tests, right? And work in collaboration with them. And so the message is to get it to all healthcare providers and community-based organizations. And we will continue to do that and to engage new providers and new healthcare providers on a daily basis to make sure that everyone's aware that this program is going on.
Great, thank you very much. I'm happy with the program's availability. It seems great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Budabin. Next, Chair Arcuri of Board 5.
Yes, are we sharing the demographic information that we're gathering with the 2020 Census Committee? I would assume there's a lot of people that we don't know out there that are coming for these tests, and it would be helpful, I believe, to share those demographics.
I know that all city agencies are collaborating on the work that's being done. I will get you a definitive answer if we are sharing information with NYC 2020. I know that our program was sort of set up to roll out just like, the NYC 2020 census. So I will get, I don't want to say yes, that we're sharing that information. If we're not, I want to remind us that, people coming forward and trusting that we are doing this for the best of New York City, meaning that people have privacy issues. And so to share information with that, for people to feel like if we're sharing information when they don't want to, we want to be as protective with people's privacy as we can. And so we're following privacy guidelines, privacy laws on the HIPAA laws, but also remember that majority of the individuals that won't come forward are those people who are undocumented. And so we don't want anyone to think that we're sharing information and it may cause them not to come forward.
But for census purpose and for the future health of this city, we need to know all of those people that live here. So you may have to do a dual outreach while you're testing them, have them fill out a census form.
We are doing outreach to get as many people through the door. We share information that about other programs that may be going on, but our focus is to get folks tested, to get folks comfortable to know that they can trust that the program will protect their privacy as much as possible. But I will again get you a definitive answer to that question and share with you what's being done in terms of NYC 2020. I know that they were also part of the discussion during the job fair, so they actively working and making sure that folks know how important the test and trace program is. So I know that, we may be talking to a lot of the same constituency individuals. So but I don't want, again, for us to, for the public to think that we're just sharing people's information with other agencies just because they came to us. Like, we're taking people's privacy really, really serious, and we want to be very protective of that. And so our goal is, to get them into the door and to get them tested and to offer the services that the program offers.
But in reality, it's already set up to go into a state and national data bank for the virus. So the information is there. At some point in time, someone is going to troll through it. So we shouldn't wait till the census is past us. We should be taking that information now.
I'm here to talk about Test and Trace Corporation. I can get you an answer on the census issue.
Thank you.
Chair Arcuri, I want to make sure I understand. So are you suggesting that we use the test and tracing data to enhance the census outreach?
Yes, because what's happening with the test and trace, it goes into the state data bank. The state data bank goes into the federal data bank. So the information is, the demographic information is out there somewhere. So we don't have that much time to develop our census count because of what's been going on. So I think we should be trolling through the test and trace to ensure that the people are counted in the census. If we wait till afterwards, we'll be undercounted the same way we were 10 years ago.
Well, thank you for emphasizing the importance of the census. And so on that note, just want a quick plug. If you haven't already, census, my2020census.gov. Queens is no longer behind, but we are getting information in real time in terms of our response rate, and we still have a long way to go. Any other questions or comments from the board? I see Chair Bratton of Board 10. Yes, please.
Yeah, just kind of a follow-up on what Vinny was saying. I understand there may not be a way to share data, but as you're developing trust in doing the test and tracing, are you doing outreach with the people that you're dealing with, that the importance of knowing where people live in relationship to the virus is data that in the future is going to be helpful? In reality, given the different aspects of this disease and how much we don't know about it, what the future situation is going to be is something that we need to know. We need to have accurate numbers of knowing how many people in whatever particular area was sick, where they live, what their income levels were, what their demographics were. This is going to help us in the future to be able to deal with whatever we're going to have to deal with. Are we at least encouraging the people that you're dealing with to recognize the aspect of good citizenship that it is for their own futures and their own families' futures to do the census in relationship to the disease?
Listen, I again, thank you so much for your question, and thank you for raising the issue of the census. I, like all of you, believe it is important to be counted, especially for our communities that are underserved, right? And so I will tell you again, people's health information is private, and we're doing the most that we can, the best that we can, and we have a commitment to make sure that that information stays private. We already have a huge task at hand to get folks to come forward and volunteer to get tested and to share with us who they come in contact with or who they might have been around. So I will tell you that that's our main focus. I will take the suggestion back to our team, right, that does community engagement and that does community engagement and share with them that the important issue you have raised around the census. It's not that we're not serious about the census. We know that New York City is serious about the census. New York City has a program that they had rolled out to address the issue about the census and to encourage people to come out and really participate in the census. But our focus here, my focus here is to make sure that Test and Trace and Take Care at Home program is a program that folks know that exists in the community, that we roll it out in a way where folks are not afraid to come forward and share the information that we need to make sure that we can get New York City to a healthy place.
Thank you for that explanation, Councilmember Palma. And there's something to be said about the testing, the contact tracing and the testing is extraordinarily time sensitive, right? From the moment that we know someone is tested positive, it's a race against time trying to inform anybody who may have been exposed to that and informing them to encourage the isolation and to prevent the community spread. The community spread that went unfettered in March and April is what we were grappling with when it was just overwhelming our hospitals and all of our services. And so I hear you, Councilmember Palma, that you are laser focused on the contact tracing, the testing, because all of that is a literal race against time. Can I ask, but also to your point, Chair Arcuri and also Chair Bratton, about the valuable information from the testing and the tracing, I think there does need to be a delineation of the census efforts in that. I know you're thinking efficiency, but there might be some problems of mixing some of that data. It's kind of like, with the New York State, what was it called? The ID, the New York City ID, and protecting the integrity and the sanctity of that data.
Correct.
To be able to protect the trust by our constituents to get that ID, and not sharing that in a way where census data is available everywhere. But to your point about how important it is with the demographics and all of that aggregate information, I believe there is a bill in the Assembly. If it hasn't already passed, I can barely keep up with how quickly the legislature and the governor are moving. But there was a bill actually introduced and carried by Assemblymember Jeff Aubrey, actually from Queens, about studying the racial disparities on how the pandemic attacked communities by zip code and by wealth and lack thereof and race and age. So a lot of that aggregate data is already being demanded of government entities. That you're absolutely right. That's critical. And we need to have access to that information. Can I ask one question if there are no other questions from the board?
Just one point, if I may.
Yes, please.
You're already treading the border with HIPAA by sharing this information with the state and federal government. So whether it's collected privately, which I did, I went to a private group that did the testing, or whether it's the National Guard doing the tracing, the testing, and then the governors and the city's tracing organizations, you're already treading heavily on HIPAA. So I don't know how it's a problem.
We're following HIPAA laws, and so we are making.
How are you doing that? If you're gathering information publicly and then sharing it with the state, city, and federal government.
Our Test and Trace Corps is New York City's Test and Trace Corps. It's not It's not part of any state efforts. We are doing our own test and
Well,
trace corps.
According
And
to the governor, he's going to collect that information. And then according to the infectious disease, the federal government then will collect from the state. So it's a really thin line that we're treading. And if we're going to go, we might as well go all the way.
it's not, but it's not sharing, there's ways to share data without disclosing anyone's information or sharing one's
So
information.
let me ask you a question. You set up a testing center. I believe the state had one at Aqueduct, but let's say you do one in Elmhurst for the city and you gather all that information, and where does it go? It doesn't die at the Health and Hospitals Corporation because it then has to be fed back to the state to say that in this zip code, we had all of these people tested and the percentage is that. And when the state collects it, it goes to the federal government. So it can't be both ways.
What I'm telling you is that we're not sharing anyone's private information.
Then what are you doing with it?
It gets there's way to aggregate the data without sharing people's information, and so you share it in the way that doesn't disclose anyone's privacy.
Then how did you come up with the calculation that it's hurting Black and brown people more than it's hurting anyone else? That's sharing the information. And that's being espoused every day by the mayor and the governor and the federal government, that the Black and brown communities are hurt more.
I'm sorry. I understand, again, the importance of the issue that you raised, but with this virus, we saw the disparities that were happening amongst Black and brown people and communities that have been underserved. This was no secret. We know that the death rate and the mayor during his daily briefings couldn't be more transparent in saying this virus was killing brown and Black people and underserved community at a higher rate than it was killing anyone else. This is about the lack of quality healthcare access that some individuals didn't have. And so this is how we came to put together this test and trace program to make sure that we could address the needs to and access to healthcare where it was non-existent in certain communities.
Well, I would urge everyone to get Time magazine, June 22, 29 issue, where it has a feature on my hospital, Wyckoff Heights Medical Center, on serving the Black and brown and poor community and how it affected them more than any others. So this is knowledge. This is definite knowledge that is being collected. So it can't just die in a corner. It has to be used to help the poor and the underprivileged.
And I'm not saying that we're collecting all this information or doing all this work for it to die in a corner. What I am clearly saying is we will not be sharing private, we're following HIPAA laws, and we're not going to be sharing any private, anyone's privacy or disclosing anyone's privacy or asking anyone who comes forward if they're documented or undocumented. This is not about an immigration status. This is about the healthcare of New York City as a whole.
And that's what part of the census is. We don't discriminate in the census between documented and undocumented. We just want to know how many people we have to serve in Queens and what kind of services they need. So this would be helpful for us to reach out to our constituents. Sorry for going on.
Not at all. It's topical and timely. Chair Weitzman of Board 6, and then I think I saw Chair Betty Bratton of Board 10 again.
Hi, thank you so much. to Chairperson Lee. I hope my audio is okay.
No,
Chair
it's
Chair
lousy.
Weitzman, it's coming very warped.
Okay, I'm turning off my video. Okay, yeah, it's if it's okay now with the video off, sometimes
It's a little painful. To be honest, it's a little painful.
Maybe she can type her question or comment in the chat and we can read it.
That's a great suggestion.
that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to tell my son to turn off the iPad.
Oh, I think I gathered from that, maybe your bandwidth is getting clogged up by your son who's somewhere online. Okay, got it. Chair Weitzman, if you'd like to either get your son offline to free up some bandwidth, or if you'd like to type in your question and comment into the group chat, and I'll be happy to read it into the group. Chair Bratton of Board 10.
Just, maybe we're off topic on this. It would seem to me that the aggregate data would have more value statistically if we were encouraging the people who have had the virus to ensure that they are self-responding. When you look at it from the viewpoint that during the time when people have been self-responding, they've been sick. Now perhaps they're no longer sick, or those who are sick who have not, excuse me, yet responded, that we are doing what we can to ensure that people are self-responding, rather than the city releasing information. But certainly the data would have much more value if, when we take the aggregate data and then compare it to whatever the population that shows in the census, it will have more value.
I see that we have a
Statement more than a
question.
question, really.
Yeah,
But maybe
yeah.
we should approach it from the other side. We need to be encouraging more from the health standpoint why people should, particularly in the brown and black communities, self-respond.
Self-respond to the tracing, the contact tracing.
Self-respond to the census.
Oh, yes, yes.
That we should be doing a better job using the health issue and the data that is going to be generated over time and how it's best going to serve us as a people.
Right. And Chair Arcuri and Chair Bratton, I mean, you're bringing that nexus of the health disparity, the health disparities, the access disparities, with how disproportionately many of our communities in Queens were impacted. I've said ad nauseum, the virus does not discriminate, but the pandemic exposed those inequities and amplified the inequities that were already part of our underlying conditions, depending on your zip code, depending on your race, depending on your access to care and safety. So thank you for bringing that nexus. I see a question from Chair Deller of Board 2, and then Chair Weitzman. I know you had some, you're probably typing it out still or talking to your son about bandwidth. Chair Deller.
Yeah, the question is, on the website, the NewYorkCity.gov website, it says it's a multi-agency leadership team highlighting the Department of Information Technology and Telecommunications. Could you tell us how that department is engaged with your program?
That's a great question.
Because they do it has provided, we have to use laptops, we have to work remotely, we there's individuals who are working remotely making calls. There are individuals who are going to be going door to door, who are going to be using devices. We have telephones that we're going to be providing to individuals who choose to self-isolate so they can stay in contact with their loved ones. Do It has helped set up all the technology that we need in the sites that we have popped up in our mobile units. So that's how they're involved in the program. That's part of the intra-agency efforts.
So does that ability to track, you're entering data into your iPad or whatever, and are they going to map that? How are they going to use that information?
We're gathering the information to know who we've contacted, to do follow-up with them, to see what kind of services that they need, to make sure that we know who they've come in contact with, to offer them to self-isolate. That's how we're using the information. And to help us, right, through these efforts, as many people as come forward and get tested, this is how we are trying to prevent us this first wave from happening again. This is how we want to know, you know, who are the folks that are positive, how they need to isolate themselves, how they need to get healthy, so that we don't have a second wave that is gonna be, you know, worse than what we've just seen up to now.
Thank you.
I think we had a question or comment from Councilmember Drum, but I see he's stepped away briefly. So while we wait for him to come back, Councilmember Palma, I just want to be really clear about what our contact tracing program looks like. So let's say yesterday I went to one of your testing sites and got tested. Today, let's say this borough board meeting is not virtual, but we're having it in our usual conference room, and we're all, you know, sitting around that big table and chatting. And then tomorrow I get my test results back and I test positive. What happens then? Like, what do you do, or what does the test and trace core do?
So we'll call Miss Lee, right? Miss Lee is gonna get her results, and you're gonna have your results that you're positive, and then the contact tracer will start interviewing you and asking who you've come in contact with, right? What does your household look like? Who lives in your home? Who have you been in a space with individuals closer than 6 feet for longer than 10 minutes, right? Will you share will you share who those contacts are, so we can proactively then reach out to them? Our team will proactively reach out to individuals you may have come in contact with, never disclosing that Ms. Lee tested positive, never disclosing that Ms. Lee gave us the information, but actually engaging them in a conversation about you may have been exposed a few days, so you know, you may have been exposed a few days ago to someone who tested positive. Do you mind coming in to get tested? Do you mind coming in to get services? And in that same process, you will be asked, you know, do you have the means to isolate at home? If you do not, even if you do and you want to come into one of the hotels that we're offering, you will be allowed to come to, even if you have the means to self-isolate at home. And so that's an option, that's a real option that's on the table for individuals.
And let's say before this board meeting in the conference room, I attended a protest that had 500 people. And then when you call me tomorrow to inform me of my positive test results, and then backtrack into where my steps have been in the past several days, do you inform? I mean, how do my fellow protesters know that I was out?
Obviously, it is a protest and a board meeting are two very different, right? Scenarios in terms of how many people are in a board meeting versus a protest. Yes, you may have been in a protest with 1,000 individuals. It doesn't necessarily mean that you were around those 1,000 individuals for more than 10 minutes at a time, right? We will ask you, who did you protest with? Who do you walk with? Who were the closest contacts to you during that protest, right? And if you were with a group of 6 individuals, right, you will let us know, I was with a group of 6 individuals, and we will start at those 6 individuals. And obviously, you know, since the protests have begun, we've had discussions about going to do education around the protests, making sure that masks are being worn, and that we are trying to set up some testing and encouraging individuals. If you've been to protest, please come in, get tested. Don't assume just because you were walking outside, you know, as part of a protest or a march, that you may not have been exposed. And so we have a strong messaging on a daily basis to make sure that individuals who are participating in those types of activities come in and get tested.
And then the other wrinkle is, let's say when I went to get my test yesterday, it was not at an H&H testing site. Let's say it was Urgent Care or Chair Arcuri's Wyckoff Hospital. How do you, as a New York City Test and Trace Corps, include that information that's not within your control because it's not within H&H?
Right. Again, if anyone gets tested in a clinic that is not part of the Test and Trace Corps program, you can proactively call 311, right? You can proactively go on our website. It's never too late to call us on the Test and Trace Corps and say, I tested positive, this is what's going on. Those resources that we offer through our program are still available for every New Yorker to be able to access the healthcare that they need.
But we at the hospital have to report to the state, who then reports to the federal government on all of the COVID testing. And that's what the borough president was asking. Are you combining what we send to the state with your information, or you're only dealing with those people that came up to you? And I'm going to make a comment, and maybe you're not going to like it, but if I was, no, that's all right. If I was Maria Gonzalez and went for it, and somebody called me and said, you may have been exposed 2 days ago at a meeting or at an event, a bingo or something, and we'd like to gather more information, I'm going to hang up on you. I can't hear.
Councilmember Palmer.
Sorry. You're absolutely correct. Listen, like I said, we've experienced hiccups starting up this program, and we have individuals who do not trust and initially don't want to accept the call. We again give them time and go back to them, trying to build that trust, trying to make sure that that folks are comfortable to talk to us. I now have one of my colleagues that wants to respond. So Joyce, you want to jump in?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm sorry I jumped on late. My name is Joyce Lee, and I am Senior Advisor to Deputy Mayor England, and I've been working with Chief Equity Officer Palma on the Test and Trace Corps. So to your question, I didn't catch your name, sir, but the city has been working closely with the state in terms of getting the positive tests that come in so that we can trace folks effectively. So let me try to break this down for everyone. The TRACE program is taking all of the positive COVID tests in this city, and they are bringing in those cases as index cases. We are contacting those folks, and at this point, we're reaching the majority of folks that we are receiving positive cases for, and then we're tracing the people they've had close contact with. And I think this is the nuance that sometimes gets lost. And I understand this is very new to a lot of people. Close contact means if you've been in an elevator with someone, if you have gone to the bathroom at the same time as someone, if you shared a close workspace, if you live with them, those are the ways that we're defining it. And one of the reasons that we have chosen, instead of using proximity-based apps, we've chosen to use community engagement specialists, one-on-one, real-life employed contact tracers, is because we want people to speak to someone who's a health professional and provide that real-time information. So there's the sort of balance between privacy and making sure that we reach all of the people as New York reopens so that we can keep everyone healthy. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yes.
And you're talking to
because-
Chair Arcuri, Chairman Vinny Arcuri of Board 5.
Because in my district, we have a lot of, we have a fairly decent immigrant population on the West End in Ridgewood and in South Elmhurst. And they're not living husband, wife, and child. They're living grandma, grandpa, husband, wife, several children, Uncle John, Aunt Mary.
That's right.
And if any one of them is test positive, they've exposed or may have exposed 8 people.
Right.
Plus, most of those people in my Ridgewood end are food service workers. They were working in restaurants. They're all out of work right now. You know, so it's a large group and it's a vast amount. And as I said before, if you get the Time magazine, see what we were doing at Wyckoff Heights Medical Center. We're
Right.
on the Brooklyn-Queens border. And
Right.
it's a large population. And I just, you know, it's impossible that you're not sharing information with the state and federal government. So why not use part of that for the census count? So we then could apply for more funding in the future to help our people.
I see. So is the question here, Chair, that we combine efforts on census outreach so that we can more effectively reach constituents, especially those who are elderly, have multi-generational households, work or live in congregate settings? Or is it about identifying the number of people in our community who live in these environments so that we can advocate for federal funding later? Because I will say, I'm sure I agree with many of the people on this call, I am completely behind folks participating in the census so that we can show the federal government that New York needs more resources.
Betty said it, the first part is what Betty was recommending. And I think I was looking also for the future. I think, Madam President, somebody was waving their hand physically.
Did I miss someone's hand? And welcome, Joyce. Good to see you. I remember you from your council days. Welcome.
I think
it was Martha.
the hand that was waving was Ms.
Martha Keller.
Weitzman that got up.
Oh, I see. Okay, so Chair Weitzman stepped away. Did
Martha
Chair
Keller.
Taylor? I don't see her on anymore. She may have lost connection.
Sorry, I confused everything with this tie-in with the census, but it's such an opportunity for us. Besides helping people that need medical assistance, it's also a way of getting a good count so we can help them in the future financially.
Right, right. Joyce and Councilmember Palma, did I hear correctly? So instead of doing the proximity-based model, which we see in other parts of the world where they do the contact tracing and it's extraordinarily effective, but also extraordinarily questionable in terms of privacy, right? Like you hear about in the news where, you know, someone uses their phone to swipe into a subway. If that person gets tested positive, immediately the government can contact everybody who was within proximity of that particular patient who swiped at that turnstile with it, you know, very quickly to say, you may have been exposed to COVID, go get tested, and they just get a text message on their phone. I mean, there's something extraordinarily efficient about that, but also very dangerous in terms of how much information and privacy or lack thereof and monitoring by government, and it makes people very nervous, especially here. But did I hear correctly? So instead of that model, the proximity-based model, we're doing a community engagement where it sounds like it's partially reliant on self-reporting?
So, and I want to say we can bucket this. So, Borough President, I want to say that unfortunately we don't have representatives from our trace team, the real science experts on the line, but we can definitely circle back with those answers. I don't want to say that the city hasn't or isn't looking into proximity-based trace apps. What we focused on first is what's actually been successful in other countries as well, is having a person-to-person infrastructure built up first. I think relying on an app means that everybody, first of all, what you've seen in South Korea with the sort of tapping of the app as you go to the store, tapping of the app as you go into the subway, that requires wide adoption. It requires that the government mandate everybody download those apps. I think in places like Singapore, they also had a proximity-based app. In a place like that, the app suffered from a low number of downloads because everybody didn't have access to the app. It didn't essentially work because the app needs to be interfacing with other people who downloaded it in order to be effective. Suffice to say, I'm sure the experts have been looking into it, but I know what New York has done with the help of folks like Councilmember Palma is look into making sure we have folks hired who understand the cultural competencies of places like Queens in order to execute this work in person. And so that's what we've been focused on right now. We've been focused on getting people tested, and we've been focusing on hiring people who speak the language, who understand these communities so that we can connect them and connect them to services.
And like I stated before, Borough President Lee, this is a voluntary program. It's not meant to be punitive in any way, shape, or form. We want individuals to come and get tested, self-report if they feel they may have been exposed.
Chair Arcuri, did I see your hand raised, or was that a delayed reaction? Okay, I know that.
Miscue.
Okay. I know the cell phone service issues, it's been rampant this afternoon with T-Mobile and Verizon, et cetera. Chair Weitzman, did you have a question? I know you had a question. You're good? Okay. Councilmember Drum? Okay.
I'm fine. Thanks. Thank you,
Okay.
Annabelle.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Councilmember Palma, for a very thorough presentation and the Q&A. Joyce, thank you so much also for adding to the discussion. You're welcome to stay. We'd love to see you. If you have any closing remarks, Councilmember Palma, please.
Again, I want to thank you for always allowing me the opportunity to come before your meetings and share the information that's needed. I will continue to be available to each and every one of you. President Lee has my information. She's more than welcome to share it with every one of you if you want to reach out. And again, continue to let us know the connections that you feel are lacking, that we can be stronger in terms of the community, and we'll make sure to be working together to make those connections in the community. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Councilmember Palma. Thank you, Joyce. And with that concludes the items on our agenda for today. We spoke generously about the census, but I also want to remind everyone that we are in the middle of an election. Early voting is happening I think most of the early voting sites have closed for the day, but early voting is underway this week. And I believe tomorrow is the deadline for you or your constituencies, anybody who's tuning in online. If you would like to apply for your absentee ballot and you don't want to be voting in person, whether it be at the early voting sites this week or next Tuesday, June 23rd, which is the primary election, you can still apply for your absentee ballot, nycabsentee.com. Are there any other items that folks would like to bring up? There was an email, I believe, from Chair Weitzman earlier today that I received requesting consideration and discussion of a resolution tonight. This resolution was not on the agenda prior. I'm not sure if we'd be able to take a vote. It would require a quorum, but nonetheless, I think the topic is timely because it relates to the budget, which, as we see, Councilmember or Chair of the Finance Committee, Councilmember Drum, many of our, especially our Queens council members, are working around the clock in their negotiations, especially the BNT, tirelessly. But I think the topic is worthy of discussion, at the very least for introduction, even if we are unable to vote on it. So Chair Weitzman, would you like to share your proposed resolution to the board?
Sure. I'm not sure I have a service.
I think your connection is still really spotty, Chair Weitzman. Can you hear me? It's really coming in and out.
Okay. I can hear you. I can, this is really unfortunate. So I apologize for my reception. I think the first step in putting this resolution forward would be a vote for adding it to the agenda. However, before we do that, I can read it out loud if Borough President Lee, if you would allow me to do that.
Absolutely. I don't know if I don't know who the recipients were of your email earlier today, this afternoon. I don't know if the board received this.
So I did send it around to all members of the, all chairs, some of whom I have the emails of their personal email and some just to the board, and I sent it to all the offices of the council members. So I apologize for my reception here, but the budget resolution that I'm proposing is whereas New York City is currently in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, which devastated the health and economies of families and communities in Queens, New York City. And whereas Mayor Bill de Blasio's fiscal year 2021 budget has called for significant cuts in a variety of critical social services and essential city operations to make up for a $6 billion budget deficit. And whereas the Queens Borough Board is alarmed at the chronic underfunding of Queens communities at the expense of maintaining a nearly untouched and opaque $6 billion NYPD budget, and whereas the Queens Borough Board is distressed at the persistence of over-policing in communities of color in New York City and the recent NYPD violence on protesters exercising their constitutional right to assemble on city streets demanding justice for Black lives, so be it resolved that the Queens Borough Board is calling on the entirety of the New York City Council and Mayor Bill de Blasio to agree to and pass a fair and equitable budget which reduces funding to the NYPD by $1 billion so that money can be invested directly back into youth, education, seniors, housing, homeless, health, and other essential services in Queens and New York City, ensuring a just COVID-19 recovery for our borough's residents, families, hospitals, infrastructure, and cities. So thank you for the opportunity to read it. I understand that we would have to take a vote to add it to the agenda, I believe. So I leave that any procedures from here up to you, but I'm really grateful for putting it on the floor for discussion.
Thank you, Chair Weitzman, for sharing that proposal. So brushing off my Parley Pro hat, in order for an item that would require a vote to be added to an agenda, within less than 3 days, it would require a majority vote of a quorum. Vicky, do we have quorum right now?
No, we do not.
Okay, what would it entail, a quorum for the record?
A quorum would require 15 members of the Borough Board.
And so that's 15 members of a combination of community board chairs and or city council members?
Correct.
Okay. So although we cannot bring this forth for a vote today, I'd like to open the floor if members of the board would like to say something about this proposed resolution. No one is required to. I will remind everyone that we are still live on our website and of course on the record, as we should be. But I did want to open the discussion if folks would like.
If I may.
Yes, Chair Curie. Yes, Vicky,
If-
I'm sorry, Chair Curie, 1 second. Vicky, yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure I said the number 16.
No, you said 15.
You said 15.
Sorry, the number is 16. It is 16 members to have a quorum
Okay.
because we can't count a half a person.
And then we would require a majority of the 16, so 9, in order to place it on the agenda for a vote. Okay, so
If I may,
notwithstanding our inability to bring it to a vote, but opening it up for discussion. Yes, Chair Curie, please.
it has to be second before you can bring it up.
If we had a quorum to even entertain it. Yes, thank you
Doesn't
for
matter.
that.
It still has to be, right now, it's a non-entity unless it's seconded.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Chair Curie. But I'd like to open the floor for discussion, if any of the chairs of the community boards would like to comment on the proposal.
As I said, you need someone to second it before you can discuss it.
I second it.
Thank you.
Seconded by Chair Deller. Thank you.
Councilmember Drum raised his hand.
Council member, could you turn your video on, please? And your audio on. There we go.
I just want to say I would be supportive of that resolution, and that the speaker and I, along with several other council members, have committed to cutting the budget of about $1 billion and returning it to services that we feel are the safety net services that New Yorkers need at this time. Of course, we still have to negotiate with the mayor, who is opposed to it, but many members of the council are in favor of it and would be supportive as well of this resolution. So thank you. Thank you, Chair Weitzman, for presenting it.
And Councilmember Drum, if there is any insight, or if there are any insights that you can share about how the negotiations are going, should we be optimistic or worried, depending on how we feel about it? And if I may,
I'll just say that I'll just say that actually, Chair Weitzman, we think the budget deficit is closer to $9 billion.
That's correct.
And we have received about $1.3 billion in aid from the federal government, but that aid was to be used only for COVID expenses and not other expenses. So unless we can come up with another $7 billion or so dollars, we are in a very, very desperate situation. So right now we are meeting, the budget negotiating team of the City Council, which I chair, has had a meeting today, as a matter of fact, and we're beginning to look at all options. In addition to the cuts the speaker and I and other members spoke to about to the department, we were concerned because in the initial executive budget that the mayor proposed, he only proposed a 0.4% cut to the NYPD, and yet a 32% cut to DYCD, Department of Youth and Community Development. And I think that a lot of our concern came out of that even before the Black Lives Matter protest happened. We were looking at that, throughout the whole budget process, which started late April. I held a series of hearings on the budget as well. So we don't know what's going to happen with federal aid. We're hoping that there will be a COVID-4 package, or so whatever you call it. But it doesn't look like Congress is going to come through with that before the end of the budget cycle, our budget cycle, which is June 30th. So we have to make some really hard decisions about what we're going to do. I think saving jobs is very important to us. We don't want to see anyone lose jobs. And there are ways to, cut budgets through attrition or other ways, look at overtime, things like that, without necessarily having to cut jobs. So, it's a tough time. And just hopefully we don't have a second round of COVID. And I'm very grateful, Madam Borough President, that in your opening remarks, you mentioned, the COVID, pandemic is still going on, and people really do need to be careful. They should, take all the precautions necessary, especially the elderly, and that continues to be a top concern. So, yeah, moving forward, we'll see. The budget is due June 30th. We have to pass a budget by June 30th, but the public has a right to see it 2 days before. So really, we have to come up with a budget by June 28th, allow the public to review it, comment on it, and then we vote on it. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Beyond that, I can't really say too much because we're in the middle of negotiations, and I need to keep some level of confidentiality about what is being said within the negotiation process.
And we respect that. Negotiations is about trust, after all. So thank you, Council Member. If I may, on that front, when we're talking about the budget, however large that adjustment in funding is or is not, I'd like to just flag for you again something that we discussed as a Borough Board back in February for the Mayor's fiscal 21 prelim, and then also my response to the Mayor's fiscal 21 executive, that Queens has been shortchanged persistently. Hospitals, we are the most underbedded. This was even before the pandemic. New York City school kids, Queens has a third of them, and yet the city spends the least amount per Queens kid than a kid from the Bronx, a kid from Brooklyn, a kid from Manhattan. Our elders, all the New York City elders, a third of them call Queens home, and yet the city still continues persistently to spend the least amount of dollars on our elders per cap of a Queens elder. So when we look at the early days of the pandemic, and fortunately and hopefully the worst is behind us, but we're still not out of the woods. But in those really dark times when we had the unenviable marker of being the epicenter of the epicenter, it was because of those underlying conditions of consistent disinvestment, divestment, essentially, years after years. So whatever adjustments there are in the fiscal 21 budget as you're negotiating, we hope that you can finally bring some parity for Queens and a fair share, even though that share is substantially less for fiscal 21.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Borough President, again. This has been an ongoing battle since I was elected to the council in 2010. And you mentioned a number of areas where it's not equitable. And there are other areas as well, including cultural institutions, including the district attorney's office and other areas. We have been successful in some areas with trying to get that equalized. But even if you look at the Manhattan district attorney's office, they get money when there are lawsuits, and they have I think it's the Volkswagen money, if I'm not mistaken, that they were able to use to back up their, practices in the office. Karen Kosowitz, former deputy borough president and current council member, she's been, the Queens delegation leader on this, and she's been really, really fighting and reminding us of all of the issues that you mentioned. But it's going to take a little bit of a while, I think, especially considering the conditions that we have now, for us to really be able to catch up. But of course, it's on the Queens Council members' minds, and it is brought up very often within the budget negotiating team. So we recognize that, and we were fighting back on that.
Thank you. We trust that you are. We know we're
Oh,
in
and
good
just also,
hands.
if I just say, Elmhurst Hospital, is in my district. And what went on in Elmhurst was just incredible. And the epicenter is absolutely right. I saw people bringing their wives and carrying them on their back to get them into Elmhurst Hospital. It brought me to tears to see what was going on the first week or so of COVID. And then the issue of food insecurity in our communities, where, still to this day, thousands of meals are being given out in my district every single day to people who just don't have access to food. It's really difficult, and then I think, look how lucky I am. I have a job, I have a good job, I have an apartment, I have a car, and but not everybody has what I have. And I just am grateful to God that, gee, look what I have, what so many others don't, and so many of the people who I represent don't have. So yeah, we'll continue fighting.
And I think so many of our constituents in all of our boards, all of our community districts are disproportionately impacted, just as you said. And I know that was a little bit of a tangent, but very much related to the proposed budget resolution as introduced by Chair Weitzman. Is there anybody else who would like to comment on the proposal? Chair Budabin.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to say, I think that the conversation and the topic, is a good one for discussion. Certainly, I think it's, a reasonable thing to be talking about, given everything that's going on and the budget in general. My initial reaction when I saw the resolution is that I think we could be very powerful as a borough board, sort of expressing, for lack of a better way to put it, the views of the borough. But from my own personal perspective, administratively, I wouldn't be comfortable taking a position as a chair of my board on an issue such as this, particularly with some of the detail that's in the resolution, without bringing that through my own CB process. My initial reaction was, I have my own personal views on this, but that it's not appropriate for me to represent my board without having run that through, the way we would typically run through a letter or a resolution that we were going to pass. Right. So I think as a general matter, just something to be thinking about for the future, I think it'd be very valuable for things that we know are coming up on an annual basis, for example, budget negotiations. If 2 months prior to that, we can have these type of conversations about some thoughts about how we might be able to organize as a borough, so that we all have the opportunity to take that through our normal processes, so that I can have essentially what I view of as the authority from my own folks. I find myself saying folks a lot lately. I don't use it as often as I have lately, but my own people to to essentially represent our view, and I think that could be really, really great. But I was planning to to essentially say that regardless of how the resolution is brought, but I think this is really important. It could be really powerful, but I think it's important to our own board members and our own community members that for things like this, especially things that are so important, that we give them the opportunity to voice their views to us so that we can represent them appropriately. So just on and on, in the future, and I'm new to this, so I don't know exactly where these inflection points are, but I think it'd be very valuable for us to sort of plan this stuff in advance. So maybe come April in our meetings, we can think about this kind of thing so that we can propose it in May and come back and actually put something together that could be powerful and collaborative as a borough.
Thank you, Chair Budabin, for sharing that and for your leadership and on your board and your respect for your fellow board members to weigh in. And again, for better or for worse, we don't have quorum to be able to vote on this. But again, we wanted to open it up for discussion because I think the topic is timely and worthy of discussion. Chair Budabin, I think you have a great idea about the potential of the Borough Board to take a unified stance on things. And, typically we do that for the preliminary budget which comes out around January, February. And so as a borough board, I think this preceded, this was right before you you were elevated as chair, or elected as chair, I should say. But earlier this calendar year, we discussed the mayor's preliminary proposed budget. But that was also pre-pandemic too. So next year, January, February, you'll still be chair, God willing, and this board will be chaired by whoever you elect in November. I will not be here, but hopefully that will be part of a longer term discussion of how to wield the power of this board. Are there any other comments that folks would like to share? Chair Arcuri and then Chair Weitzman.
So, Danny, I'm sorry, Councilmember Drum, what percentage of?
Danny's fine, Vinny.
Yeah, I know, but we're in public now. So what percentage of the current budget does this $9 billion represent as an overrun?
About 10%. So,
Okay,
you know,
so if we were going to be equitable, we'd ask every department, every agency to propose a budget reduced by 10%. And then we'd probably have to ask for a wage and benefit freeze, and we'd have to deal with the unions on any future increases. Is that correct?
yeah, I mean, the speaker and I have also called for the agencies to identify 5 to 7% more on top of the PEG, the program to eliminate the gap, that they already did, to bring that up to almost that 10% area. So that's where we're at right now in budget negotiations, is getting them to identify those areas across the board.
So, and not looking to hurt the community boards, since we are a mayoral agencies, should we be asking the mayor's part of the budget for the greater cut?
For the 7%?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that would be very helpful to us to share the pain equally. You know, the council's also going to take a shaving at some point, and I think everybody has to share it. I spoke with some people today at the Irish Arts Center, you know, on the west side, 51st and like 10th Avenue, and they all agreed to take a salary cut. So I think, you know, it was a great example to see people who believe in the cause and believe in saving New York City, believe in working with New York City, to make that type of a sacrifice. So I think that, you know, we as New Yorkers have to come together and make those sacrifices. But yes, it would be helpful, Vinny. Yeah.
Thank you, council member.
Chair Weitzman.
Hi, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Borough President Lee. I changed my computer, so hopefully my audio is better. I should have done this in the beginning, and my apologies to everyone. But first, I want to thank everyone that shared their thoughts about this, and to Borough President Lee, thank you for opening the discussion, and even though we can't officially vote on it. And to Chair Budavin, I really appreciate the thought to through your board, and just so everyone knows, we did take a community board 6 did vote on a budget resolution similar but a little bit different than the one that I proposed today. It did pass with quite a large majority, but of course there was, you know, a lot of discussion that happened. I really appreciated the open discussion, and I really like the idea that you brought forward to kind of strategize and think about a way that all of the borough board, the chairs, and together with the council members, that's loud, can really do that more and really collaborate in a way that's really meaningful. And, you know, for example, today I really wanted to email everyone, and for some reason I don't have everyone's contact information. So something as simple as that, I would love to just be able to collaborate more openly and open the lines of communication. And I think it would be meaningful to our individual boards, but also to the borough moving forward. So to Borough President Lee, thank you so much for bringing this to the table today. And I'm very much grateful to your leadership here.
Okay. And actually, Chair Budabin, you reminded me something else that you'll look forward to in January. And I think Chair Aguilar, you'll get to look forward to this as well. In January is when we have the Borough Board budget hearing. And it's a marathon session of public testimony here at Borough Hall. And I say that, not entirely unjust, because that's actually, you hear directly from folks, members of the public, organizations, who provide services, constituents who testify about what the needs are, and that helps shape and inform our vote as a borough board about the preliminary budget, as well as the mayor's executive budget ultimately. So that's something you'll look forward to in Q1 of 2021. If there is no one, yes, Chair Bratton.
Thank you. As we're coming to the end of this, just want to throw out a thought. I'm sure Vinny would agree with me, and probably some of the other older people on this board. When you look at what we're facing now as a city, taking a hatchet to the budget may not be the wisest idea. It's far better done with a scalpel. I don't envy the role that the council has to play at this point in time, because they have some serious decisions that have to be made. But if you look at the inequities that Queens has suffered over the years, much of that inequity has its roots in how the budget was dealt with back in the 70s. And it has taken many decades to get back. We now have a totally different type of council. And that's a good thing. We have a totally different structure of government than we had then, where the outer boroughs have more say-so. But I believe that we have to be careful, as important as this issue is, and it is important to address the societal issue that we have in front of us. It's long overdue. But we have to be careful that we don't set another scenario where budgets get cut, but they don't get cut equitably, and all of the people in the city don't share the pain of those cuts. We need to be really careful, and the council doesn't need, directives from us on what to do. We need to trust that the council is taking the steps that they need to take. And that doesn't negate the importance of the issue. The issue is important. But in a sense, we're engaging in a discussion when the discussion is far more important in how we are going to deal with the cuts that we have to face. I'd be far more comfortable with a resolution addressed to the Senate of the United States and the President of this country to get more money into the state and city so that we don't have to make the kinds of cuts that we have to do. And on that, since we're wrapping up, I'll shut up. But we need to be careful in how we approach the budget.
Thank you for that, Chair Bratton, and please never ever shut up. Never ever shut up. And I think that's a great idea. If anyone would like to propose a resolution for consideration at the next Borough Board meeting, I ask that we abide by some of our Parley Pro constraints and submit it for consideration minimum 3 days in advance, so that everyone has a fair chance to review it. But again, Chair Weitzman, thank you so much for sharing the proposing it itself. Thank you to the Borough Board for sharing your insights and thoughts, short of taking an actual vote. And if there are no other comments, I will officially close this item, close the discussion on the proposed resolution. And with that, the next meeting will be a joint meeting, as we typically do every July. Will be a joint meeting of the Borough Board and Borough Cabinet, July 20. It's a Monday, 5:30. As of now, we will plan to do it online. I think the virtual, we're getting used to we're getting the hang of the virtual meetings, and I am certainly in no rush to endanger anybody by having these meetings in person unless absolutely necessary. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing you on July 20th, if not before then. Have a great evening.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Chair Curie, seconded by Chair Bratton. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right, with no opposition, the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much. Have a
Thank
wonderful
you,
evening.
Borough
Good night,
President.
everybody.
Good night.
See you later.